All right, so many of you are probably thinking about senior living options at some point or another, and it can be a lot to figure out.
Absolutely.
We're going to take a deep dive into the differences between retirement communities and assisted living based on what we learned from field senior living.
Yeah.
They're a pretty big company with communities all over the place, so their perspective is definitely valuable. But as always, we're going to be thinking critically about everything.
Right. And it is interesting because while their perspective is valuable, they're also selling these services.
Right.
So their insights are definitely coming from a particular angle.
Exactly. So let's start with this idea that a lot of people have that retirement communities are just for people who want to take it easy all the time, like play shuffleboard all day.
Right.
But what we found is a much more interesting picture.
Yeah, the article talks about this whole shift in how we see retirement these days.
Yeah.
It's not about slowing down. It's about choosing how you want to spend your time and energy.
It's like active adulting or something. Fitness centers, social events, maybe even a golf course.
And that makes sense because more and more seniors are all about continuing to grow and learn and connect with others.
Right.
They're not interested in fading into the background.
No.
They want to thrive.
Yeah. And the article uses the word choice a lot when talking about retirement communities. And I think that makes sense because the residents are typically independent and manage their own lives.
Yeah, that's a really important difference.
Yeah.
Because while they do have that choice to be independent, they can also get help with things if they need it, like housekeeping or meals.
Right.
It's all about having that flexibility to change things up as their needs change.
Okay, so let's talk about assisted living. Now, the article takes a different tone here. It's more about support and reassurance.
Right, because assisted living is really for people who need some extra help with their daily activities. It's about giving them that support while still respecting their dignity and independence.
So I'm curious, what does that support actually look like in real life? The article mentions being supervised 24/7.
Right.
But what else is included?
Well, it's a pretty wide range of services, actually.
Yeah.
It could be help with things like bathing or getting dressed or managing medications or cooking meals, things that can get tougher as we get older.
Right.
And yeah, that 24/7 supervision is a big deal.
Yeah.
It gives everyone peace of mind, both the senior and their family.
Now, the article makes a pretty strong statement about assisted living being better than a nursing home. And that really got my attention because we're all about looking at things from different angles here.
Oh, better is a tricky word, isn't it?
Yeah.
It really depends on each person's needs and what they prefer. But the article does make some good points.
Right?
For example, it says that people in assisted living can have more independence than in a nursing home where things are a lot more structured.
And I noticed they talked a lot about personalized care plans.
Yeah.
What does that actually look like?
So imagine you move into an assisted living community. The staff doesn't just give you a generic schedule. They actually sit down with you and learn about your habits and preferences and health needs.
Okay.
And then they make a care plan just for you.
Oh, wow.
It's about treating you like a person, not just a patient.
That makes a lot of sense.
Yeah.
It seems like assisted living is trying to find that sweet spot between giving people support and letting them make their own choices.
Exactly. And that's the main difference.
Yeah.
The article is trying to highlight retirement communities are all about choice, and assisted living is about finding the right level of support.
But like you said earlier, better is really subjective. The article is really focused on the good things about assisted living compared to nursing homes.
Right.
But are there any downsides? Are there times when a nursing home might be a better choice?
Oh, absolutely there are. For people who need medical care all the time or who have specific medical needs, a nursing home might be the only option.
Yeah.
Assisted living isn't a replacement for serious medical care.
That's a really important point, I think. So even though the article is really into assisted living, we need to remember that it's not the right answer for everyone.
Exactly.
It all comes down to individual needs and what's going on in their life.
Right.
So this brings us to a big question. How do people figure out what's best for them or their loved ones?
That's where things get really interesting, and that's what we'll be talking about in the next part of our deep dive.
Okay, sounds good. So welcome back to our deep dive. We're continuing to look at all the details of retirement communities and assisted living to help you feel good about making these big decisions.
And one thing that really stands out to me is how these senior living options reflect this bigger change in our society, how we see aging now.
Oh, yeah, I see what you mean. Like, it's not about retiring in the old-fashioned sense anymore, right?
Exactly. It's about redefining what retirement means. And this article from Field Senior Living talks about that a lot. This growing desire among seniors to keep learning, keep growing, keep engaged. It's so different from that old idea of retirement being about slowing down and just taking it easy.
Right. And that makes me think about assisted living.
Yeah.
How does that fit into this new idea of aging? Because it's not all about being super active and independent, right?
You're so right. Assisted living is all about accepting that sometimes aging gracefully means getting some help. It means recognizing that our needs change, and that's totally okay.
Right. So it's about finding that balance between providing care and letting people keep their independence. And that can be a big relief for families who might be having a hard time providing that care themselves.
Absolutely. And speaking of families, there's something we haven't talked about yet, the money part of all this.
Oh, yeah, the elephant in the room.
Right. Both retirement communities and assisted living cost money, and I'm sure those costs can be really different depending on the place.
Oh, definitely. Location is a huge factor. And then the amenities they offer and how much care you need.
Right. The article mentions that assisted living is more affordable than nursing homes. But even within assisted living, there's a big range.
So you really have to look beyond the brochures and get those personalized quotes, right?
Yeah, absolutely.
Make sure you understand exactly what's included in the price.
Couldn't agree more. You got to ask questions and get all those little details because this is a big financial decision.
Okay, so we've talked about how our views on aging are changing, and we've looked at the practical side of care and support, and we've talked about the money side of things.
It's a lot to think about.
Yeah.
But I think it's important to have all this in mind.
I agree. So what's next? How can we help our listeners really understand what it's like to live in these places?
I think it's time to get into the details, to move past the big ideas, and look at some real-life examples.
I like that.
Let's really paint a picture of what life looks like in these communities.
Because honestly, those brochures and websites don't always tell the whole story.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So, for example, what kind of social activities might you find in a retirement community? What does personalized care really mean in assisted living?
Yeah.
These are the things that can make it all come to life.
And what about the staff?
Oh, yeah, that's important.
What kind of training do they have?
Mhm.
What are their qualifications?
Right.
What's the ratio of caregivers to residents?
Those are really important things to consider when you're trying to figure out the quality of care.
Exactly. And as we talk about these real-life examples, it's important to remember that every community is different. There's no one perfect model. It's all about finding the right place for each person.
Absolutely.
So are you ready to dive into those real-world scenarios and really see what life is like in these communities?
I am. I think our listeners will find this next part really helpful.
All right, so welcome back to the deep dive. We're in the final stretch of our conversation about retirement communities and assisted living.
And like we promised, we're going to move past all the theories and get into the actual experience. Let's paint a picture of what daily life might look like in these different settings using some real world examples.
Yeah, I think that's what everyone really wants to know, right? Like those little details that help you imagine what it would be like to actually live there.
Okay, so let's start with retirement communities. Imagine a place nestled in the hills, maybe with walking trails and a beautiful courtyard and maybe even a putting green.
Sounds pretty nice.
Right.
But what about all those social connections and personal growth opportunities we talked about? What do those actually look like?
Well, the article mentions a whole bunch of options, and this is where personal choice really comes in. Some communities might have things like book clubs or art classes or even guest lectures and workshops.
Okay.
Others might organize trips to local theaters or museums.
So there's a lot of variety.
Yeah, a ton of variety, catering to all sorts of interests and personalities. And that's really important to remember. Not all retirement communities are the same. Some might be more relaxed and laid back, while others are super active. It's all about finding the right fit for you.
Right. Okay, so let's switch gears and talk about assisted living. Can we paint a similar picture of a typical day there?
Sure. Let's imagine a smaller, maybe cozier community with a focus on personalized care and support the atmosphere. Might be more intimate, like a close-knit family.
And you mentioned before that staff training and qualifications are a big deal when you're looking at assisted living facilities.
Right.
What specific skills or certifications should families be looking for?
Well, caregivers in assisted living should definitely have good training in caring for older adults.
Mm-hmm.
That includes knowing how to help with things like bathing, getting dressed, and managing medications.
Right.
A lot of states also require certain certifications, so it's always good to ask about those.
Okay, and what about the ratio of caregivers to residents? I imagine that can have a big impact on the quality of care.
Absolutely. A lower ratio usually means more individualized attention and quicker responses to residents' needs. It's definitely something to ask about when you're checking out different places.
Okay, so let's say someone needs help getting dressed in the morning. Can you walk us through how that might work in an assisted living community?
Sure. So a caregiver would knock on the resident's door at the time they agreed on, always respecting their privacy.
Okay.
And then they'd help the resident get dressed, offering choices and encouraging them to do as much as they can on their own. It's all about finding that balance between providing support and maintaining dignity.
And what about meal times? How does that work in assisted living?
Most assisted living communities have communal dining areas where residents can eat together.
Okay.
It's a great way to socialize and feel like part of the community.
Right.
The staff would help anyone who needs assistance with eating, making sure everyone gets the nutrition and hydration they need.
So it sounds like there's a real focus on creating a supportive and caring environment in these communities. It goes beyond just the basic tasks of care.
Absolutely. It's about promoting well-being in every aspect, physical, emotional, and social. And that's what makes assisted living different from more clinical settings like nursing homes.
Okay, so for someone who's thinking about assisted living for themselves or a loved one, what advice would you give them as they start looking into it?
I'd say start by visiting a few different communities in your area, talk to the staff, meet some of the residents, get a feel for the place, pay attention to the little things like how clean it is, how friendly the staff are, what the overall vibe is like. Trust your gut feeling.
It's about finding a place that feels like home, right?
Exactly. And remember, this is a big decision. Don't be afraid to ask questions. Get all the information you need to feel good about your choice.
I think we've covered a lot of ground today. We've busted some myths about senior living, explored the ins and outs of retirement communities and assisted living, and even looked at some real-life examples to help you picture what it's really like.
We have. It's been a real deep dive, and I hope everyone listening feels more prepared to navigate this world, with more clarity and confidence.
So whether you're planning for your own future or helping a loved one make these decisions, remember there are resources out there to help you.
And maybe most importantly, remember that aging isn't an endpoint. It's a journey. It's a time for continued growth, connection, and fulfillment.
Well said. Thanks for joining us on The Deep Dive. We'll see you next time for another fascinating exploration.